So we pause here and we can take up any comments or questions.
I love everything that you always say, and I'm always intrigued. The second you mention MP Pandit, my ears just prick up. I think there's two or three things. Firstly, about the great man, because I've always been intrigued by him. And you sort of hint at it, and it's so tantalizing when you say he imprinted experiences. Could you say a few words about him and what he was? Maybe that's all I need to ask, actually.
No, that's fine. In the early years of the ashram, one of the special features of those who came to Sri Aurobindo and the mother was that you were not allowed to join the ashram unless they saw you fit for the concentrated practice of the integral yoga. There is a less concentrated practice and then a more concentrated practice. And the ashram was originally created for a very concentrated and intense practice. So people were vetted. They would see the photographs of people and accept. Panditji himself at that time was quite young when his mentor Kapali Sastry had joined the ashram. But because it was still under French rule, India was under British rule, so they had to maintain a certain secrecy. And so Shastriyar was in the ashram when Panditji had this experience. He went into his brother's library. His brother was a lawyer. Is it father's? Father's library, sorry. Father's library as a lawyer. And there is this All India Reader, which is a whole series of all the law books with all the cases and all that. They all look exactly the same. If you've ever been into a lawyer's office, entire wall full of books, they all are bound, colored exactly the same, only with numbers distinguishing them. He goes into this room and spontaneously pulls out a book, one of them, opens it, and on that page is Alipur bomb case. He knows nothing about any of this, and his eyes go straight on the name Aurobindo Ghosh. And then he puts the book away, except that after that the name Aurobindo Ghosh started repeating spontaneously, and it wouldn't stop. And something great deep joy began to fill him with the repetition of the name. Aurobindo Ghosh, Sri Aurobindo, and it was the name in the Alipur bomb case when Sri Aurobindo was arrested by the British and put in jail. So that itself is an extraordinary event in that sense. But then he wrote to Shastriyar. The letter goes to Pondicherry, where Shastriyar is sitting with Sri Aurobindo. And Shastriyar writes back, he can't say, I am with Sri Aurobindo. He just writes back saying that as you grow up, the full meaning of this will become evident to you. Of course, later on, he came to know that it was possible to be here, and he was permitted to visit. And as soon as he completed his studies, he joined the ashram. He grew up as the mother's secretary. And at the age of 21, he had joined the ashram. Every day he had to meet and interact with the mother for management of affairs in the ashram, and very wide and detailed responsibilities. He was handling for a while the entire reception service, all the guest houses, all the correspondences with the disciples going from the mother, and everything was neatly, beautifully organized and arranged. He would work often till late at night, till 10 at night sometimes, and he would be back at 4 o'clock, resuming his work, all uninterrupted. So when he came to the ashram and he joined, he was given an option. He could stay with either his sisters, who were in a different house, or with Shastriyar. And he said, obviously with Shastriyar, that was the relationship. And so through him, he gained much. And being with the mother so frequently, he said every moment being with her, you would experience the growth and the learning, because her ways, her values were so different. So he was literally molded by her in his outlook to life and his values. And I had the privilege of growing up in his care, and so watching him quite closely. through at a time when a person is most vulnerable. You know, in the evenings, mornings, early mornings, when you're about to sleep, and you're seeing how a person is. So it had a very strong imprint of what it meant to be, to live the yoga and to be in a state of aspiration in everything you do, without exception. Everything is a part of your spiritual life. So this was broadly as an introduction of how he came. In the later years, of course, there were things which he shared with us, many stories, events. And we saw also how he worked very often when something had to be done. Simply by choosing to do, simply by putting a certain intention, the things would tend to happen automatically. Not only in circumstances around, but even in his own physical body. So at some point, for example, the doctors advised him, because he had a heart condition and a heart attack, the doctors advised him to reduce his weight. And so we saw he did not change his food in any way, except that the rice which was placed, he would remove a tiny portion, nominally. It was the intent. And once a week he would check the weight. And it dropped until it came to what the doctors had advised, and then it remained rock steady. So even in the body you could see how intending it, you could modify the body's functioning. And a spontaneous way of knowing things. People would come and ask him questions or narrate to him things of certain locations, events. And he would know. He would give insight. And so at one point, somebody asked this question specifically, how is it you know? And he said, well, one can know without needing to physically verify. We saw all these things very naturally. But his way of teaching was also the way Mother taught. You know, when Mother sat for meditations in the ashram, she sat with a group and she gave the experience, and that was it. Of course, everything depended on your receptivity and what you did with the experience after that. But the experience was directly given, and that was how he did it also. So in that period when I had just completed my formal education, there was a series of experiences which were coming through, and I was just like that, very receptive. It started in a way I can describe like this. After the morning breakfast, he would go to the ashram, so I would go with him, and he asked me to go to the meditation hall, and then I would come to greet him before going for my work at the archives. So before going, I would fold my hands and just bow down before him, and he would take his middle finger and just place it on the forehead, gently touching. And so I noticed, I don't know when, over a few weeks, that every time that he touched, I felt something entering, and which in time became very distinct. It was as if a ball of liquid golden light would flow in and go down into my heart, and here burst open, like that. Soft, very gentle, sweet. And I would come out of the office and look around, and the whole world was so beautiful, and everything was conscious, and the flowers were glowing, and the walls were alive, and everything was conscious and alive. And my relationships with people were spontaneously one of, what can you say, except love. Even the person you would have labeled enemy was only the person you love to hate, and it's love still, you know. And I would be in that state through much of the day. But it built up. That's why it was so gradual, I did not even realize until I can now remember it as an experience which was so distinct and so complete. I would come back from work and he would be either reading or doing some work. I would simply sit there, and sometimes he would continue his work or he would stop and just sit quietly. And I would feel just be in that, something imprinting, soaking in, whatever. So that was the period when there were many such very beautiful experiences, which, so to say, defined the journey subsequently. After his withdrawal, these things began to fade, because I was as if compelled by circumstances to do this, do that, finish this, and there was a pressure to do work which tended to exteriorize. So it even came to a point where I lost many things which seemed to have been before that natural. And that's when I realized, oh, not everybody experiences that. I used to think that's normal for everyone. So I had to experience what it's like to not have anything and then to work to regain and rebuild. And as long as he was in the body, we never missed the mother's physical presence because of that tangibility of the presence. It was only afterwards we realized, that's what it feels like. When people said, oh, we don't feel mother's presence, oh, what does it mean? So I think that's a brief introduction from the spiritual side.
This is again sort of picking on your personal recollections, because I'm just so fascinated by the greats that have come in the past. And this kind of links to the topic that you've been talking about. Clearly the great sadhak that came from the master that is regarded as the embodiment of the cosmic consciousness, Ramana Maharishi, was Kapali Sastry. But he obviously trekked towards Pondicherry because there was something that he saw that he wanted, and he found it in Sri Aurobindo. And clearly he was your teacher's teacher, which is awesome. I was just wondering if you could say something about him, and what is it that led him to think that even the greatness of the Maharishi was insufficient, that he had to come to Pondicherry?
Kapali Sastry was initiated into the Sri Vidya Upasana, the lineage of Tantra, which worships the Divine Mother in the form of the Sri Yantra, even when he was a young child. And by the age of 12, he had read the Mahabharata several times. And he was already into very intense austerities of practices, including at their traditional deity temple in Chennai, standing on one leg in concentration in prayer for long hours. And so some of these things are quite, for us, they're strange. But in that tradition in which he grew up, they were the various means of concentrating. Later he came under the influence of Vasishta Ganapati Muni, and was with him when Ganapati Muni visited Panditji's house in Shirsi. That's how Kapali Sastry came to know, or Panditji came to know of him. Ganapati Muni saw Panditji as a young child, when he was 12, and said to Shastri, I see a light on his forehead, so look after him. That's how the connection stayed. And so Shastri basically took responsibility for the whole family, for this one thing, one person. It was Ganapati Muni who recognized Ramana Maharshi and named him as Ramana Maharshi. So they were both, so to say, brothers spiritually. Ganapati Muni was an emanation of Ganesha, and Maharshi was an emanation of Kartikeya. And of course their parents were in Pondicherry. That was the relationship. And when Ganapati Muni came and met the mother and had the meditation, the very interesting description from the mother also, as well as Ganapati Muni. Mother said when he would walk into the hall, all the hostile forces would run away. Such was the power of his tapas. And in the first meditation, the mother commented that she had never gone as deep with anybody as she went with him, and so easily, because all the tapasya he had done had prepared him, and he was a very developed master. He is the only person we know of to whom the mother and Sri Aurobindo asked to join the ashram with this intention. Mother said, we are looking for somebody who would continue the work after us. So they saw in him that potential. But he could not for various reasons at the time. But Shastri was with him, and with Ramana Maharshi therefore. By then already Shastri had met Sri Aurobindo. And there's a very beautiful description of his meeting with Sri Aurobindo. As he walked up the stairs to go to Sri Aurobindo's room, all the centers, all the chakras within him began to open spontaneously. So he said, such is this great master that in the very approach your chakras begin to open. He recognized in Sri Aurobindo the extraordinary being that he was. But at that time he was still with Ramana Maharshi, and they had reached a point in closeness where Maharshi said that only a thin veil remained between them, and they would have merged in self together if that had been completed. That's when the choice was made, and Shastriya felt that his further spiritual destiny was with Sri Aurobindo. So he made the choice to leave. But subsequently, when Maharshi wanted one of his writings to be translated, and he made a special request to Shastriya, who took Sri Aurobindo's permission and went there and completed that work. So he remained as a bridge in that sense. But he had already read by then Sri Aurobindo's Arya, all these texts which were appearing in the Arya serialized. So when the Arya issue came, Shastriya would read every night the entire text of the Arya, every night until the next issue came. So that was the kind of an avid thirst he had. In his own earlier education, all that he had been trained spiritually under Ganapati Muni had prepared him for Sri Aurobindo's approach. Because Ganapati Muni himself had taken an approach to the Vedas similar to what Sri Aurobindo developed in much greater detail later on. But more than that, when he came to the ashram, he makes this very interesting observation. Having come there, within 6 months in the ashram, he was able to achieve more than what would have taken him 10 years of the intense sadhana that he was used to practicing. In 6 months that was achieved. And he said this is only because of the action of the Divine Mother's Shakti. And it gives you a sense of what that means. A person who has dedicated his life from childhood in intense spiritual sadhana, saying that 10 years of work is achieved in 6 months because of her Shakti. It gives you a sense of what it really means for the opportunity given to us. If only we had worked a little bit to develop that possibility, develop that commitment or concentration of our priorities, we could benefit so much more. And once Panditji asked him, all that sadhana which you did earlier, what was its benefit? What did you gain from it? What was its use? And Shastriya, he says, sat up bolt upright and said, what? It has brought me at the feet of the mother. So you recognize also that to be given that opportunity, there had to be a certain worthiness and a preparation. And in that sense, all of us are so fortunate that with whatever preparation we have or do not have, we have been given that opportunity. And it's a question of making the best use of it now. So their lives really are inspirations for us in this sense. On the internet? Okay. Yes, but there's a lot of literature. His own writings are there. He was a master in so many different fields of knowledge, including Siddha medicine and the Vedas, Upanishads. He knew multiple languages with mastery in each of them. And he was a master of astrology also, as well as many of the other systems of knowledge, traditional systems. In the Tantras, he was a master. But all of that, he said, once he came to Sri Aurobindo and the mother, it was secondary. So what he wrote subsequently was only what was relevant for the integral yoga. What Sri Aurobindo developed in his Secret of the Veda and in the translations that he made of the Vedic texts, Shastriya then continued under Sri Aurobindo's guidance to complete, I think about more than 1/3 of the Rig Veda, all of which was corrected by Sri Aurobindo. So it has the authenticity of Sri Aurobindo's stamp on it. So he has done extraordinary work which is available. Unfortunately, not so much on the internet. This year, the next year, June 14th, will be Panditji's centenary. So we hope to put up a lot of their writings online also. Maybe then you will find it easier. Otherwise, do take a look at the books, the printed copies. Panditji has written a beautiful introduction to Shastriyar. In pithy, 3 or 4 pages, he sums up the extraordinary genius.
Glory of glories, Sri Kapali Sastry, whose birth centenary we celebrate this year, 1986, was a versatile personality. He was deeply versed in scriptures, Sanskrit and Tamil, an adept in the traditions of the Veda, Upanishad, Gita, Tantra, Yoga, proficient in astrology, astronomy, Ayurveda, Siddha medicine, and above all, he was a powerful writer. Though he wrote fluently in 4 languages, Sanskrit, English, Tamil, Telugu, Sanskrit was his first love. He has written extensively in Sanskrit and is highly regarded both for his original expositions and commentaries on revealed texts. Literature was his forte, and he was a born poet. His prose is poetic, his poetry mantric. His life was an unending pilgrimage to the spirit, and he drank from many springs of wisdom and inspiration right from his childhood. Though he had diverse interests of mind and soul, his being was always aflame with an intense quest for the truth eternal. As a child, he received initiation into Sri Vidya from his revered father. He adored and worshipped the Supreme Divine Mother, Sri Lalita Tripura Sundari, as an undistracted Upasaka. Early in his youth, he came into contact with Vasishtha Ganapati Muni, whose touch led to the blossoming of many a literary and poetic talent in him. The Muni led him to Sri Ramana Maharshi, who played a capital role, seen and unseen, in the spiritual unfoldment of the young seeker. Thereafter, he was brought by an obliging destiny, as he would put it, at the feet of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. He devoted the rest of his earthly life in the practice of their Purna Yoga. Most of his writings were done during this period, and naturally they are redolent with the fragrance of his integrated sadhana. As with the Master, all fields of experience that came into his ken were touched and elevated by the light of the soul.